I'm Emily Carter, 27, and on the morning of my wedding, I walked into the day knowing my parents had chosen not to come. They had made their disapproval clear, calling my groom unworthy and vowing not to support me if I went through with it. I married him anyway. I smiled through the vows, the kiss, the applause, while their empty seats in the front row told everyone exactly where they stood. But only hours later, everything shifted. My parents saw his face online, not as the quiet man they mocked, but as the CEO of a billion-dollar company they had been chasing for years. 99 missed calls lit up my phone, each one begging me for an emergency meeting. What happened next turned the day they tried to ruin into the day their entire world fell apart. And it all started with one choice: love over approval. The church bells tolled in a rhythm that should have carried warmth, but their echo only sharpened the absence I already felt. Rows of polished oak pews were filled with friends, colleagues, even distant relatives, but not the two people who were supposed to sit in the front row, closest to me. My parents' seats remained empty, a silence so loud it seemed to cut through the music. They hadn't just skipped the wedding. They had staged a protest. Weeks earlier, my mother's voice had cracked over the phone, shrill with disappointment as she repeated the same sentence. "If you marry him, don't expect us there." My father, colder and quieter, had only said, "You'll regret it." Their words landed like verdicts, as if their absence would shatter me. But when the doors opened and I stepped onto the aisle, holding my bouquet steady, none of that mattered. My groom stood waiting. Calm. Centered. Eyes steady on mine. And in that moment, the absence of approval felt like nothing compared to the presence of love. I smiled as I walked forward, not because everything was perfect, but because I was choosing what mattered. The whispers from the guests, the vacant stares at the empty chairs in the front, the little sting of what my parents refused to give me, all of it faded. My steps matched the music, and each one sounded like defiance. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows exchanged. Rings slipped into place. The applause rang heavy and full. And when he kissed me, the world tightened into a promise I knew I could hold. What my parents thought of him didn't matter. What the world whispered behind closed doors didn't matter. He was mine, and I was his, and nothing could rewrite that. But fate has a way of staging its own surprises. Hours later, as the evening calmed, I noticed it first, my phone vibrating against the table beside the cake knife. At first, I ignored it. Who would I pick up for when the world was already celebrating with me? But the buzz didn't stop. One call. 2. 10. The screen filled until the numbers blurred. 99 missed calls. Every single one from my parents. It was a pattern they had never drawn before. They weren't people who begged. They were people who commanded. Yet now, their desperation crackled through the digital silence. And then the texts followed. Short, frantic bursts. Emergency. Call us immediately. Meet us tonight. Now. This is serious. You don't understand. For a moment, I thought something had happened, an accident, some kind of family crisis. But then the truth revealed itself, not through them, but through the endless hum of the internet. My husband's face had gone viral. A headline spread across my feed, an article glowing in its praise. His photograph stared back at me, the same suit he'd worn at the altar, the same expression of controlled certainty. The young CEO behind a billion-dollar breakthrough. That was the line. That was the secret they never bothered to ask about. While my parents dismissed him, mocked his quiet demeanor, and sneered at his lack of ambition, the man they had turned their backs on was building something they could never touch. It wasn't just recognition. It was exposure. Everyone saw it. Their friends, their rivals, the very business partners my parents had been chasing for years. And now, there he was, the same man they condemned as unworthy, standing at the center of the future they wanted so desperately to buy into. Their calls made sense now. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about regret for missing the ceremony. It was about panic. A sudden, searing realization that they had spit in the face of the one connection that could have opened every door they'd been knocking on. I didn't call back. I didn't even read the rest of their messages. Instead, I did what they never expected. I reached for my phone, opened my camera roll, and chose the photograph that captured it best. Me and him, hand in hand, rings glinting, smiles steady. Then, I typed the caption slowly, savoring every word. The best decision I ever made was choosing love, not approval. I posted it, and in minutes, the tide shifted. Congratulations flooded in. Comments stacked by the hundreds. The applause that had once been confined to the church now echoed across the internet. Strangers admired, friends cheered, and quietly, I knew what was happening on the other side. My parents' social circle sharpening their knives, tearing apart the arrogance they had worn like a crown. They wanted me at an emergency family meeting. But they had no idea. The emergency wasn't mine. It was theirs. As I set my phone down, the laughter of my guests filled the room again. The music swelled. My husband leaned close, his voice low enough for me alone. They're panicking, aren't they? I didn't have to answer. He already knew. And while the world was watching, while my parents drowned in the chaos of their own making, I was already moving forward with a plan they would never see coming. The morning after my wedding broke with a strange calm, but it didn't last long. Sunlight slid across the curtains, touching the edges of the room like everything had shifted, and in a way, it had. The vows, the applause, the photo I posted, all of it had started a storm I didn't need to chase. It was already circling around me. My phone sat silent for the first time in hours. 99 calls had stopped only because exhaustion must have pulled my parents into silence. But silence wasn't peace. It was the pause before the next strike. I knew them well enough. They weren't going to disappear. They were strategizing. I sat at the edge of the bed, still in the afterglow of everything that had happened, but the thoughts wouldn't leave. My husband walked out of the bathroom, buttoning his shirt, steady as always. He didn't seem rattled, not even after the internet explosion, not even after the truth about him spread through every social circle. He only glanced at me, smiled slightly, and asked, "Are you ready for what's coming next?" The way he said it wasn't nervous. It was measured, deliberate. Like he knew exactly how people like my parents operated, how their hunger for power could drive them into corners they swore they'd never step into. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to laugh. They had rejected him, dismissed him, even called him unworthy of me. Now, they were clawing at the very idea of an audience with him. By noon, the silence shattered. A black car pulled up outside our building. My phone buzzed again, not with calls but with a message so blunt it felt like a command. "We're waiting downstairs. Come immediately." No apology, no hesitation. Just the same tone they had always used, even when they had nothing left to stand on. I didn't tell them yes or no. Instead, I stood in front of the mirror, tied my hair back, and put on a plain dress. My husband watched quietly, his reflection behind mine. "You don't owe them anything," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge, an unspoken warning that they'd already burned their bridge. "I know," I answered. But that wasn't the point. If they wanted to sit me down, to drag me into some last-minute plea disguised as authority, then fine. I'd walk into that room. I'd listen. But it wouldn't be on their terms. We stepped into the car they sent, the driver avoiding eye contact as if he had been ordered not to speak. My parents had always loved orchestrating control, even in details like that. The ride was silent, thick with the weight of what they wanted to say. They were waiting in a private dining room of a hotel, expensive, cold, calculated. My mother rose when she saw me, her face carefully smoothed into something that almost looked like relief, but not quite. My father stayed seated, his expression unreadable, fingers drumming against the polished table. "You didn't answer us," my mother began immediately, her voice low but urgent. "Do you have any idea what's happening?" I sat across from them, folding my hands in my lap. "I know exactly what's happening." Her composure cracked for a second. My father leaned forward, speaking with a weight that tried to reassert control. "You don't. You think you do, but you don't. Do you know what your husband's company means? Do you know how many doors it opens? The partnerships we've been fighting for, the contracts. That's what this is about." I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. Not me. Not my marriage. Just business. They didn't deny it. My mother's silence confirmed it more than her words ever could. She looked at me like I was holding the key to something she couldn't live without. For years, they had prided themselves on their status, their reach, their unshakable control. Now, in a single night, that control had collapsed. What we said before the wedding, my father continued, was out of frustration. We didn't mean. I laughed. Not loudly, but enough to slice through his words. You didn't mean to disapprove? You didn't mean to call him unworthy? You didn't mean to tell me I'd regret marrying him? Their faces tightened. They weren't used to being challenged. They weren't used to their words being repeated back to them like weapons. My mother reached across the table, her voice softening as if that could erase years of arrogance. You have to understand. We didn't know. If we had. That's the point, I said. You didn't want to know. You didn't ask. You decided who he was based on your version of what mattered. And now that you've seen what everyone else sees, suddenly you care. For the first time, they looked cornered. My father shifted, his jaw tight. You can be angry all you want, but this isn't just about family. This is about survival. Do you think his company is just his? Do you understand how quickly alliances move? How fragile networks are? If we're not part of this, we'll be left behind. It was almost pathetic. The man who had built his reputation on never bowing, never chasing, was now begging in the language of desperation. My mother's hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it by adjusting her glass. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so they couldn't mistake my words. You're right about one thing. This isn't just about family. This is about survival. But the survival in question isn't mine. It's yours. The silence after that felt heavier than the walls around us. My father opened his mouth, but no words came. My mother's eyes filled with something sharp, not quite tears, but a realization she couldn't swallow. I stood. You wanted an emergency meeting. Consider it over. Their eyes followed me as I walked out, their power dissolving with every step I took away from that table. Outside, my husband was waiting. His expression didn't change when he saw me, though I caught the faintest trace of satisfaction in his eyes. They tried, didn't they? They begged, I said simply. And I smiled, though there was no softness in it. I let them know the doors they slammed shut last night aren't opening again. We walked away together, leaving them inside that room, caged by their own panic. The world was already moving on, cheering for us, dissecting them. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. They were chasing mine and finding nothing but closed doors. The cracks in my parents' empire didn't take long to widen. What they feared most, losing their grip on influence, was no longer a shadow on the horizon. It was happening in real time, and the very people they once used to measure their worth were the ones turning away from them. By the end of the week, whispers had turned into full conversations. Partners they had courted for years no longer returned their calls. Invitations they once commanded were rescinded quietly, replaced by cold silence. The photo of me and my husband, the caption I posted, and the viral article about him kept circulating. It was a combination that carved their reputations apart piece by piece. I watched from a distance. I didn't intervene. I didn't even speak their names aloud. All I had to do was live my life while their carefully constructed image collapsed without me lifting a hand. But my parents weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully. They reached out again. Emails. Messages. Another letter sent to my door, in handwriting that used to feel familiar. This time, the tone was different. Less urgent, more pleading. Words like family, blood, and forgiveness were scattered across the page. I knew what they wanted. They didn't crave reconciliation. They craved access. To him. To the company. To the billion-dollar empire they thought they had been close to touching until they realized they had been standing outside the gates the entire time. My husband saw the letter too. He read it once, then set it down, his face calm as always. They're circling the drain, he said. If you answer, even a little, they'll use it as a lifeline. I nodded. I don't plan to answer. The truth was I didn't need to. The world was answering for me. A week after the wedding, a business magazine ran a feature that highlighted not just him, but us together. The headline wasn't about power or wealth. It was about loyalty. It framed our marriage as a story of love against arrogance, devotion against pride. And in doing so, it painted my parents in the clearest light possible, people who threw away what mattered most for the sake of appearances, only to be left with nothing when appearances betrayed them. Their circle responded accordingly. Friends who once clung to them now slipped away. Rivals who envied them now mocked them. At gatherings, their names became cautionary tales. The whispers were brutal. They refused to attend their daughter's wedding. Now look who she married. I didn't need revenge. They handed it to me themselves. But the story wasn't over until I closed it. 2 weeks after the wedding, they requested another meeting. This time I agreed, but not because they deserved my time. I wanted to finish what they had started. The location they chose was smaller than before, less polished, almost desperate. A far cry from the hotel dining room where they once sat like rulers demanding my presence. When I walked in, their posture told me everything. My mother's shoulders sagged, her eyes hollowed. My father's suit looked sharp, but the man wearing it seemed aged, beaten down by the weight of humiliation. "You came," my mother said quietly, almost in disbelief. "I did," I answered. My father cleared his throat. "We made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I tilted my head. "You boycotted my wedding. You ridiculed the man I love. You told me I'd regret him. And now that the world recognizes who he is, you're scrambling to rewrite history. That's not a mistake. That's who you are." They didn't argue. That silence was louder than anything. "You want something?" I continued, not softening my tone. "So, let's stop pretending this is about family. Say it." My father finally admitted it. "We need to be in that circle." His circle. The business opportunities, if we're cut out completely, will fall. I finished for him. He swallowed hard, his silence confirming it. I leaned back in my chair, the calm I felt almost startling. Then fall. Because the only doors opening in my life are the ones you can't enter. My mother's voice cracked, desperation slipping through. "We're your parents." "And I'm your daughter," I replied evenly. That should have meant something before the world told you who he was. But it didn't. You chose pride over love, status over loyalty. And now you're paying for it. They sat frozen, as though waiting for me to offer them one last rope to climb out of the hole. But I had nothing left to give. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor in a sound that cut through the tension like a blade. "This is the last time I'll meet with you. My life is moving forward, and you're not part of it. You wanted an emergency meeting, a second chance, a rewrite. But the story's already finished, and you're not in the ending." My father didn't speak again. My mother's eyes filled, but no words came. The weight of reality had finally landed, heavier than anything I could have said. I walked out without looking back. When I stepped outside, my husband was waiting. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. I slipped my hand into his, and together we walked into a future that no longer had shadows from the past clinging to it. Later that evening, I posted one final photo. It wasn't of us at the wedding. It was simpler. Our joined hands, rings gleaming under soft light. The caption read, "The doors to my new life are wide open." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't name names. But everyone knew. The comments poured in again, congratulations, admiration, even praise for standing firm. And somewhere, in the quiet corners where my parents once held power, the whispers grew louder, final, irreversible. Their downfall wasn't loud or violent. It was slow, precise, and undeniable. I had chosen love. They had chosen pride. And in the end, love won.